All right, it's time for the news update. I'm here with contributing writer Jake Fogelman. Welcome back to the show again this week, Jake. I think you have an interesting story about trends in gun ownership during the pandemic. Is that right?
Yeah, we have a really cool new survey that just came out from the University of Chicago, detailing kind of stuff that we've covered for a long time here about the surge in gun ownership during the pandemic. We got some good data now for the 2-year period from March 2020, when the pandemic really started in the U.S., to March of this year. And what they uncovered was fairly remarkable. 5% of all U.S. adults became first-time gun owners during that time period. So 1 in 20 adults bought a gun for the first time, according to the survey at least. And among those, 69% were people of color, they found, compared to just 26% of pre-pandemic owners. So clearly a remarkable jump in the amount of minorities buying guns for the first time.
It's huge.
And they were highly skewed towards younger gun owners, which is also pretty big because younger gun owners traditionally weren't really represented in gun ownership broadly. I think they said 86% of first-time buyers were under the age of 45, compared to just 40% prior to the pandemic. So pretty remarkable numbers here.
That is incredible. And this is from the University of Chicago, so it's sort of a more academic look at this topic than what we've seen before, because most of what we've been relying on, I believe the University of California did a survey of just people in California, or I think they looked at the registration records in California, which backed up the most commonly cited stat, which comes from the National Shooting Sports Foundation, which is the industry's trade group. And they did a dealer survey where they asked gun dealers what their impression of their customer base was. And that's how we got the numbers we've used in the past of, I think it's 13.5 million or so new gun owners over that 2-year period, according to NSSF. And so now we have sort of another data point to look at, which is 5% of the adult population bought a gun for the first time, which I think you run the raw numbers, it's a little bit less than what NSSF has brought in. But these other statistics match up pretty consistently with what that NSSF report had found and what the industry has been saying for a while, which is that gun owners are getting younger and more and more minorities are becoming gun owners as well. And so that seems to be exactly what's reflected in this survey, right?
Well, that's right. Yeah, it brings a little bit of empirical context or more empirical context to some of the observational data that we've covered and that you saw thrown around in the media quite a bit. So while you said, the numbers might not be exact, but it does point to a real trend that's been backed up over and over and over from different surveys. And what's even more remarkable, another thing that they found in this survey, was the attitudes of these new gun owners towards gun laws. So we've known for a while in past gun surveys that folks that own guns are typically more likely to be opposed to gun control than those that do not. And that same trend held for these first-time gun owners. And in fact, on some policies, they were actually more opposed to gun control than the previous gun owners that bought before the pandemic, which is just another astonishing finding, that a lot of these first-time gun owners are hardcore about their gun rights, or at least a decent chunk of them are, rather.
Yeah, and that's getting into the territory where it's sort of adding credence to things that we've predicted would happen, right? Where we said, there's all these new gun owners, and gun owners tend to be more favorable towards less restrictive gun laws. And so over time, you could expect to see at least some percentage of these new gun owners becoming more favorable towards loosening gun laws.
Right.
And this is a survey where we're seeing exactly that happen. And actually, it's pretty surprising because you're right. Some of these responses, they're actually more aggressive about wanting to reduce the regulation on firearm purchases. And so that's pretty fascinating. What were some of the areas where you saw these new gun owners' beliefs come out?
Yeah, there's one that I really want to key in on because I think it's pretty telling. They were asked, so it was pandemic first-time gun owners that owned their firearms before the pandemic, and then non-gun owners were all polled. And particularly for the policy about shortening waiting periods, you saw the biggest gap between first-time gun owners and pre-pandemic gun owners. So 65% of first-time gun owners supported shortening waiting periods, whereas pre-pandemic gun owners only showed up about 49%. And I think that's pretty telling because it's something we kind of talked about and something that you reported on early on when you talked to a lot of these folks that were buying guns for the first time and they just weren't quite aware of what the process was like. And suddenly there were all these roadblocks in their way when they really felt like they needed a gun. And what do you mean I have to wait 10 days to come pick up my gun? Or what do you mean I can't get a gun right now? So I think that one is a key indicator, I think, of maybe some of the experience that these first-time gun owners went through. And maybe that informs some of their beliefs.
Right, absolutely. I think that is a big tell because it indicates that some of these people, when they went to buy their gun for the first time, were interacting with their state's gun laws for the first time as well.
Right.
And perhaps didn't realize that they were more restrictive than they thought. And so that might be why they're actually even more opposed to something like waiting periods for gun purchases than people who already own guns and maybe had gotten used to the idea or whatever the case might be. And of course, they're far more opposed to the idea of waiting periods than people who don't own guns.
Sure.
So,
yeah.
That's interesting. It does feel like perhaps that was because a lot of people in California and Florida or wherever else, a number of these other states that have waiting periods, they ran into them in the midst of an emergency where they felt that lives were potentially threatened, where they wanted to be able to buy a gun to protect themselves, right? And they didn't like the idea of having to wait. So it's pretty interesting to see that actually play out now in actual academic survey.
No, yeah, that's exactly right. And another thing that we've covered a lot is the rise in concealed carry permits. And you see that borne out in the data here as well. The gap's not as big with this one because, we've also covered that concealed carry has just gotten pretty popular more broadly among gun owners. So you don't really see the same gap between first-time gun owners and pre-pandemic gun owners. But they're both very supportive, for example, of, this is one of those kind of vague questions, but allowing people to conceal carry in more places, whatever that means.
Right.
You see 68% of both types of gun owners supporting that. You see equal numbers supporting permitless carry. Not quite majorities, it's still 41%, but you see equal numbers between first-time gun owners and previous gun owners on these policies. So you do see, equal popularity with gun carry as well with these first-timers.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting to see what, the first evidence of changing attitudes due to people buying guns for the first time. And, obviously it's still just one piece of data. We're going to continue to follow this and see what else comes out and how the story might change down the line or how these people will actually affect the political atmosphere down the line as well. I mean, it's one thing to respond to a polling question in a more pro-gun way, but it's another thing to become a sort of single issue voter, as they call it, on guns and start to see an impact in how elections actually go. And I think, in my opinion, what'll be most interesting to see how blue state gun owners, first-time gun owners in blue states actually react when it comes to the politics, whether this becomes a higher priority for them than some other issues that they might already be. Because I think it's common for people to assume that gun owners are all stereotypically have the same views and beliefs and look the same and have the same concerns. And clearly that's not the case from this polling. Right. We certainly don't all look the same. It's a whole different demographic of people buying guns for the first time during this pandemic. And what we'll need to see is how that has an effect on elections moving forward. I think ultimately that's what the key indicator will be. If you see Democrats and Republicans becoming more pro-gun in their political stances because they're losing elections or winning elections over this, which actually, at that point, you had another story briefly this week that was that showed Republicans have a 8-point advantage, I think, on guns.
Yes, 7 points, I believe.
Yeah, Morning Consult found that. So, pretty, whether that's due to new gun owners or not is less clear, obviously, but perhaps that's part of it. And we'll have to, wait and watch this play out. I think it'll take years. I don't think it's something that happens overnight. I mean, certainly some people expected all the new gun owners from 2020 to immediately turn into Donald Trump voters, and it does. It certainly didn't seem like that happened. So obviously, people vote on more than one issue generally, but if these new gun owners bring gun issues to the top of their voting priority list, maybe that will have a significant impact moving forward, and that's what we're really going to keep on top of, I think.
I think that's exactly right. Yeah, we've got a ton of polling to show that there's some movement going on, but like you said, tangible political results will be the real tell to see how lasting this trend is and how much it affects our politics. So